Hello. Three periods in newspaper history greatly influenced what newspapers look like today. The penny press period, the invention of the telegraph, and yellow journalism. In the 1600s in this country, we were operating under an authoritarian system of the press under England. Some examples. Benjamin Harris's newspaper, Public Occurrences, was put out of business after one issue because he wrote that the King of France had an affair with his son's wife. Then John Peter Zenger started a paper in New York and criticized the Crown of England. He was arrested. His attorney argued there should be no punishment, though, for printing articles that are true. They won the case, and to this day, the news media value their independence from government control. Other examples. The Sedition Act provided that any person writing, printing, or uttering any false, scandalous, or malicious statement against the U.S. government would go to jail and pay a fine. Some people went to jail. The law expired after a couple of years and was not actually renewed. Thomas Jefferson actually pardoned everyone found guilty, but this law is still on the books. But because of the First Amendment, would not be favored, not likely to be favored. And then another point, in the early years, advocacy journalism prevailed. Newspapers really crusaded for political causes. Editorial opinions were not on a separate page. So, all media go through stages, the elite, mass, and age of specialization. Newspapers started as pamphlets for a cause, very much advocacy journalism, for people who couldn't read. Not everyone read in those days, so it was very much an elitist medium. The postal system was critical to the development of a mass media, newspapers as a mass media. The postal system was the only nationwide communication network in the pre-telegraph, certainly pre-internet days. Benjamin Franklin, who started out as a colonial postmaster general, was, as some of you know, also a printer and a newspaper publisher. One of the first things that he did was to pass rules that benefited the newspaper industry. For example, newspapers went through the mail for free. This was a significant subsidy and did a lot to encourage the spread of newspapers. Are newspapers specialized today? No, not really. They still try to appeal to a mass audience. Newspapers became a mass medium during the penny press period. Around the 1830s, actually, the population centers were just getting large enough to support a true mass circulation newspaper. It was no accident that for the next 70 years after 1830, New York remained the newspaper center, as you can see in this slide. Population was a key characteristic. So here are the newspaper publishers of the era, and we want to start out with talking about Benjamin Day. He sold newspapers for a penny per copy. Hence you get the term, the penny press. Day's paper was unlike any others in content. The others were very learned, very elitist, very aristocratic in style. Day was more likely to stress what we call today sensational news. He hired an Englishman, George Wisner, who covered the police beat in London to cover the police beat in New York. He became the first police beat reporter. He was always searching for the spectacular. Day's paper would prefer the story about a severed head discovered to a routine crime story, even if the severed head was discovered several states away. Day also did other things that were certainly questionable to build up his circulation. He made up stories. The most famous of these was a series on another race that lived on the moon, which was widely believed. It doubled his circulation. It was actually believed until the day until Day admitted it in the paper that it was all made up. The Moon story doubled his circulation, and then when he admitted that he made the whole thing up, his circulation jumped again. We're still puzzled by that one. Another person that contributed to American journalism is James Gordon Bennett. And he published the New York Herald. And this was another leading penny press paper. So Bennett started regular beats. He hired reporters, preferably reporters who had good language skills. He even found a few people with college degrees, which most people in journalism did not have at the time. And he hired them to cover beats. They didn't just cover police, business, and government. They covered sports and society and really started to develop different parts of news coverage. Another strain of journalism developed in the New York area, and that was the New York Tribune by Horace Greeley. He was a prominent political figure, a prominent thinker of the 19th century, and at one time a candidate for the U.S. president. What Greeley did that was different from other papers was establish the role of journalism as an advocate at the mass level. Opinion pages, once you start thinking about it, go all the way back to Horace Greeley. The difference, Greeley is talking to thousands upon thousands of people and actively seeking to make his paper a forum for multiple opinions. He ran his own opinions more than anyone's, but he also commissioned columns by many people. Greeley was so well thought of as an editorializer that when he launched a weekly edition of the paper that had circulation all over the U.S., it was widely read by everyone. It had a big influence because people who had never been exposed to opinion journalism came to accept opinion journalism as a routine part of the paper. Here's another contributor. A final contributor to the penny press period is Henry Raymond, who was founder of the New York Times. Henry Raymond was said to said a few interesting things as well. He is not the one who said all the news that's fit to print, but he said something close to it. And here it is. Oh, there it is down there. We do not mean to write in a passion unless we are, and we will make it a point to get passionate as rarely as possible. So really, he set the standard for objectivity in newspapers. So if you're looking for at least a likely starting point for objectivity, it is the New York Times. So these three men had a big influence on newspapers as we know them today. Their papers resulted in a mass circulation medium that changed the definition of news and created separate editorial pages, and they also contributed to literacy in this country. Technology was also on the rise, and one of the big new techs of the era was the telegraph. The telegraph sped up the delivery of the news and created a nationwide system that was far more efficient than it had been. Prior to this telegraph, if you wanted the national news, you had to wait for the mail or maybe a message carrier to bring it. So the telegraph had a number of effects. And one of the effects was the formation of wire and news services like Associated Press. You could not have a wire service without a wire. So it changed the way people wrote news stories as well. So this was a development of the telegraph. The gift of the story is at the top. And this is called the inverted pyramid. The most important things are at the top of the news story. This is still the way we write in many of our newspapers today. The inverted pyramid did not exist until the middle 1800s. And what accounts for it? Using the telegraph. If you ran out of money after the first paragraph, because it cost money to send it over a telegraph, you could still have the essence of the story, and that was the idea. It also put a premium on getting to the point. Most newspapers up to the spread of the telegraph were still very flowery in prose. So with the telegraph, every word cost money, so cutting out words became a valuable matter. And more than anything else, the telegraph, in this context, contributed to the standard of brevity as we know in journalism today. Another impact was that most newspaper stories had been written for a specific local community. That changed with the telegraph. Now news went nationwide. So you couldn't tell stories in a way that might not be interesting to people in California if you're writing them in Chicago. So the notion of detachment and objectivity really developed as a result of the telegraph. And we became very consistent in style. So since we were sending stories across the country now, they all wanted to look the same. So style became very, very important. Some thought the telegraph was just speeding things up too quickly. News was just becoming very fast, and that it was harming the whole notion of quality in journalism. And you can see in this editorial chosen from the day, this is some of the concerns that they had about the speeding up of news and the competition of news that was taking place. Because of the speed of communication, it was much harder to scoop the competition. And so the telegraph changed journalism in many ways. Next up was how yellow journalism changed what we see in journalism as we know it today. There are a few people that were taking advantage of all the new technology, and the main two were Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. Hearst and Pulitzer are really interesting because of the newspaper war that they conducted between one another. And the first thing to note is that both Hearst and Pulitzer started newspaper careers elsewhere, Hearst in San Francisco, Pulitzer in St. Louis. Each had developed at least the beginnings of a formula that they applied in New York. And both of them bought newspapers in New York that were really struggling and not really very good newspapers. So this started what was called the newspaper war and yellow journalism. I'll start with Pulitzer because he got to New York first. He was the established paper when Hearst showed up. So Pulitzer did a number of things that were matters of building upon the basic newspaper. Probably the first thing he did that would be important was really working at professionalizing his staff. He wanted to hire people who were well educated, college graduates if possible. And he wanted to hire people who had some kind of formal study in areas that they were likely to cover. So he took the beat system and he took it one step further. And that one way that he did so was by increasing salaries tremendously. Prior to Pulitzer, you could hardly make a living in newspaper. Pulitzer did a lot of circulation research as well. That was a new trick. A lot of people had not even looked into the possibility, but he wanted to find out where his readers lived, what kinds of things they were interested in, and what kinds of sorts of products they used, which then gave him data that he could sell more ad space with. He sold more ads, made more money, and increased the size of the newspaper. Pulitzer also started printing multiple sections that had to be fitted together in some form. And Pulitzer also pushed a lot of causes. What Pulitzer did was one step different in that he pushed causes in the editorial pages in the paper and by active involvement of the newspaper. Now, who shows up? William Randolph Hearst. There's a significant difference, between Pulitzer and Hearst. Pulitzer was a very learned man. Pulitzer saw journalism as a public calling. He did it almost as public service. In contrast, Hearst did it because he did not know what else to do. This is a very important element when you compare the products that the two ultimately prepared. Hearst was the son of a very wealthy industrialist landowner, and he stood to inherit the family fortune. He was not very interested in formal education. He got kicked out of Harvard and never went back to college. When he finally got to be about 21, his father thought he should do something useful. His father asked him what he wanted to do, and he said he'd like to take over the San Francisco Examiner, which was one of the papers owned by the family. The key characteristic is that he went into it on a lark. He went into it for fun. For those of you who may never have seen the movie Citizen Kane, it's based on the life of Hearst. So he went into newspaper work almost as a matter of play. He was very undisciplined. Sometimes though, being undisciplined is a good thing, right? So what he did, first off, he went in and he hired people away from Pulitzer. Doubled their salaries. Pulitzer had a cartoonist who produced the cartoon strip, The Yellow Kid. So this was about the first thing Hearst did when he showed up in New York, was offer the cartoonist double the money and hired him away from Pulitzer, and that's what kicked off the newspaper war. So the term yellow journalism really refers back to this stealing of the cartoon rather than style, although later it came to mean sort of tainted journalism, yellow journalism. He offered almost all of Pulitzer's staff double the money, and about half of them came. He also pursued sensational coverage. Pulitzer did as well. Where Hearst probably made his biggest change, a change that you see today in American journalism, was in the appearance of the paper. Hearst, in a literal sense, saw the newspaper differently than other people. When he took over the San Francisco Examiner, and later he did the same thing at the New York Journal, he looked at it and thought, these papers are boring. They're boring. Single column headlines. How often do you see single column headlines anymore? You just don't. They seldom ran a photo or an engraving, even though the technology was there. Another aspect of the paper was that at the time they had many columns. So our standard Metro daily papers have 6. Theirs had about 12. Just really pretty narrow stuff. So he defied convention. He started using wide headlines and big artwork. And he used a lot of kinds of conventions and headlines that we know of today. Let's take a look. Here's one of them. Hearst's headlines were fairly interpretive, and our headlines remain interpretive today. They're attention-getting. The basic look of the paper, with some exceptions for the way certain elements are laid out, are not all that different than from what Hearst envisioned himself. So Hearst's contributions included further creating more sections of the paper, and maybe most notably was the development of a Sunday paper. His idea was that people could read it at their leisure because it was the only day they had to read the newspaper. So he really expanded, and he also included a magazine supplement. So there you have it. The newspaper evolution, what occurred during the penny press period with economic support. People are now paying for newspapers, distributing them widely, expanding the definition, and then came yellow journalism with more interesting, attention-getting newspapers, larger, expanded newspapers, more professionalism. And that brings us up to today and where we are with newspapers moving forward. Thank you.